Boris Johnson is here. He is, as you know, the mayor of London. He has served in that role since 2008. This summer, he announced his intention to stand for election to the United Kingdom Parliament into the 2015 general elections. A lot of people read a lot into that. His latest book is about Winston Churchill. It is called The Churchill Factor, How One Man Made History. The Wall Street Journal reports there is a long history of ambitious politicians writing books to burnish their leadership credentials, from profiles in courage to the audacity of hope. That's from John F. Kennedy to Barack Obama. The Churchill Factor is more like JFK's book than Barack Obama's, in that it doesn't make a direct pitch for its author's candidacy, but drops a colossal hint. That's all from the Wall Street Journal. He would deny it all. I am pleased to have Boris Johnson back at this table.
It's a great honor to be back.
Oh, so why did you write this then?
I wrote it.
How many books are there on Churchill?
It's probably about 100 a year. But what the Churchill family and the Churchill estate said was they had the 50th anniversary of his death coming up next year, and they genuinely felt that although there's a huge weight of scholarship about Churchill, there wasn't a book that tried to bring it together and to argue again to a new generation that Churchill was the great man that I think he was and that people of my generation think he was. I think the younger generation, he's receding a bit. He's fading. I think there was a survey...
Because World War II is fading?
Well, because the vastness of his achievement is slowly being lost to people. I think there was a survey that showed that most people think that he's a dog in an insurance company advertisement. There's an insurance company called Churchill with a dog mascot.
Yeah.
And that's what young people think. So it was an attempt to bring him to life again for a new generation, and to show the sheer scale of what he achieved, but also why he was the only guy who could have possibly achieved it. How it came about that in May 1940, Britain and the world stood on the brink of absolute disaster. And
Paris had
captured. Gone. The French were hoping that we would do a deal with Hitler, because that would palliate their own indignity, their own humiliation. Reynaud was over there arguing. Chamberlain, Halifax, all the appeasers in the Tory party were telling Churchill, do this deal.
Make a deal with Hitler.
Make a deal with Hitler. And if he had, you'd have had a Nazi-dominated continent, Europe. You'd have had an epic disaster for humanity, that it's possible, after all, that Hitler would have been able to invade Russia successfully earlier. Who knows what would have happened? It would have been a catastrophe.
Instead, he had to fight a two-front war.
Instead, he had to fight a two-front war.
And it was in the winter, and he tried to go to Moscow, and that derailed everything.
Absolutely. And Churchill always knew that if he could hold on for long enough, Hitler would lose, because in the end, the Americans would come in. And that was his whole strategy.
Right. And he tried.
And it worked. Yeah. In the end, it worked.
It took 2
years and 4 months.
A good portion of his time was trying to get Roosevelt to do it. I mean, all those years, John Meacham wrote a very good book about Roosevelt and Churchill. It's
a wonderful subject. Because, don't forget, Churchill, though his mother was American and he came to this city in 1895 when he was only 20, and he loved America, but he also, I must confess to you, there was also a part of Churchill that felt a certain sadness about America's eclipsing of Britain. And in the 20s, we've got to be honest,
I know.
In the 20s and in the 30s, he became so anti-American that Clementine at one stage tells him he couldn't be foreign secretary because of the level of his feelings. Because America was...
But was it all jealous?
It was jealous. I think that is the right way. I think it was a feeling that America was elbowing Britain off the top of the... elbowing, which was true.
Sure.
And
it went into high gear after the war.
It went into high, and in public, Churchill said of Lend-Lease, the great deal by which America helped Britain to fight on and supplied those planes and those ships. He said it was the most unsordid act in history. But in private, he said Britain was being skinned and flayed to the bone, and so he was complicated. And he didn't actually, at the end, don't forget, he doesn't go to Roosevelt's funeral. Remember?
Yeah.
And so it's a very, very complicated...
What was his explanation for that?
Not good enough, I think, is the answer. It was not, his explanation, whatever it was not, he should have gone. And I think he regretted it. And don't forget that at the end of his political career, when he's got his cabinet around for the last time in 1955, he has two pieces of advice. One, man is spirit, whatever that may mean. And second, never be separated from the Americans, which is sound guidance.
When you sat down, I said, this book is about, what is greatness and how do you get there? It seems like this is a man who wanted to be great and thought about it and did things that he thought would put him on that.
That's very astute. That's right. I think that's it. There's a great element in Churchill of self-assessment. He knows exactly who he's got Napoleon in his sights. He's got Nelson. He's got busts of both of them on his desk at Chartwell. Churchill, you don't forget, was not a big guy. He was 5'6.5" tall, maybe 5'7". He was his chest 31 inches as a young. He was a shrimpy guy who sort of built himself up, literally using dumbbells but morally also.
You do have a feeling though that he believes so much in his own capacity that he could be Britain, that he was willing to do almost anything to make that happen.
Yeah.
Whether it meant shifting parties, whatever was necessary.
He did.
To get power.
Ah, yes. Yes, and he's a famous... there's been no one like him before or since in British politics, in that he rats on the Tories in 1904 and then rejoins them. Of course, he would claim that he'd been consistent because the Tories had abandoned free trade and then came back to free trade. But he rejoins them in the 20s and then becomes Chancellor of the Exchequer. This renegade, this traitor, is then made Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Yeah, why was that? Because they recognized that he had real ability?
They did. Everybody knew throughout his political career that they were dealing with somebody who was truly exceptional. They all pointed it out. So
everybody knew that.
They knew, and actually in some ways...
But not to be trusted.
Correct. He was thought of as a loner, as a maverick, as a guy who continually got things wrong. But then in the late 30s, he takes this gigantic political position, this bet that Hitler's wrong.
Hitler's coming.
Hitler's a bad guy.
Right.
He can see it because he's been out there to write about. He's been out there in the early 30s. He's seen the marching kids and all the rest of it, and he smells it. And he was totally right.
You wrote, he wasn't what people thought of as a man of principle. He was a glory-chasing, gold-mouth-hanging opportunist.
He was. He took positions that crumpled beneath him. But the amazing thing was he survived. And the other thing about the positions that he took was that he never at any stage was morally compromised. When politicians get things wrong in our times, very often there'll be some element where their own honor or integrity is at stake. They will have been shown to have lied about something or whatever. Nixon or whatever. But that was never the case with Churchill.
It is said about him that he was his father didn't spend a lot of time with him. His father was not there for him. And so, therefore, he was overly protective of Randolph.
Yeah, he had a very complicated relationship with his father. And there's a tragic essay he writes called The Dream after the war, in which he imagines that the shade of Randolph is sitting in an armchair next to him, and Randolph is saying, "Well, my boy, nice to see you. Well, tell me about the world today." And Randolph doesn't understand that Churchill has become the greatest living Englishman, and his father forms the impression that he's a sort of retired former army officer who's interested in painting, and Churchill's bursting to explain his success to his father when, poff, the shade vanishes. And you have this sense of Churchill's yearning to impress his father. His father wrote him terrible letters when he was at school, saying he was a confounded young wastrel and all this sort of thing.
You know how many men come to this table and central to their psyche is this idea, and they've said it, I did okay, Pop.
Yeah.
You know, say to your father.
That's
the whole notion of
well, the monkey on Churchill's back, as it were. What was that? That was no. And his relationship with his mother was fascinating. What a woman! Absolutely extraordinary woman. And New Yorker, of course. Yeah. She was very influential in his early life.
What was his greatest skill, other than his will to prevail?
Other than his will, I was going to say it was never giving in, but I think if it were the thing that he had that I found stunning in writing the book and researching about it, and then many people who dig into Churchill come out with this feeling, it was his energy, his industry. I mean, so it was the toy with the battery that just keeps going, and Churchill's unlike anybody or any journalist I know who he could drink red wine at dinner, red wine, white wine, brandy, liqueurs,
prodigious.
He would then get up from the table, 10 o'clock, go upstairs to his office in Chartwell. He would walk around while some poor secretary was waiting up all night and dictate until like 2, 3 in the morning.
Dictate what? A book or speeches or thoughts
memos.
Or memos?
And that way he composed not just more words than Dickens, not just more words than Shakespeare, but more words than Dickens and Shakespeare combined. And he won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And his paintings still sell for about $1 million.
This was a Nobel Prize he won for his history of the Second World War.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you may, some people say, well, it was the Swedes feeling a little bit guilty about their neutrality during the war, and then maybe the Nobel Committee felt that was all, But still, the Nobel Prize is the Nobel Prize.
It's a monumental work. 6 volumes, isn't it?
Extraordinary.
But what's interesting about it is that I once visited Chartwell, I guess it is there. And they showed me where he would write.
Yeah.
And he would have everybody who was present at anything.
That's right.
During the war. If they were in the room, they would send him their story of what they remembered.
That's right.
And then he would write his own version, which would be consistent with that.
But basically, he would take everything and put his stamp on it.
That's right.
That's completely right.
Yeah.
Chartwell was a kind of gigantic word processor of a house. So you'd have the sort of search engine, you'd have the data banks, and he'd press the key, and then these people would scuttle up with bits of paper. Yeah. That's how he did it.
When I ask about the greatest skill, I think it was...
charm.
Charm.
Charm. Amazing charm. He had so many fantastic literary gifts, ability to speak directly to people, to move them, to sway them.
But he understood it, too, because it is said that he built the pauses and the halting because he knew that if it appeared that this was something he is just thinking, it had a more powerful appeal. So he'd pause as if I'm looking for the right word.
Yes, which of course was complete artifice because his speeches were very far from unpremeditated. They were declamations of text on which he had worked very hard. And his secret was using short Anglo-Saxon words. When he really wanted to he would say, remember, we will fight them on the beach, we will fight them in the hills, we'll fight them in the streets, we'll fight them in the landing ground. We will never surrender. The only Latinate word is surrender. He likes using short English words.
He liked films, too, movies.
He did like films.
Because he'd have these movies shown. I know people that were there during World War II who since passed on, but they would talk about going out to his house for movies.
They would.
On the weekends of the war.
I'm afraid he watched Lady Hamilton by Alexander Korda 17 times and wept every time. He was a prodigious blubber. He wept at almost everything. Yeah. But he was an emotional guy.
It was, I think, Jack, you would know this better than I may remember. Jack Kennedy, the president, said he mobilized the English language.
I think, was it Jack Kennedy or was it Ed Murrow?
It may have been Ed Murrow. Either way, they're heroes. Yeah.
They're both heroes. Right. But he did. He mobilized the English language and he sent it into battle. And the great thing about his speeches and his wartime broadcasts was that they were aimed not just at the British, but he always had an eye to America. And he knew that was the crucial audience, and that if he could reach his motherland, as it were, and persuade them, then he'd have done his duty and get them into the war. That was his big achievement.
So why did the ungrateful British turn him out of office?
It's one of the great questions of politics, and I think the answer's blindingly obvious. He'd become somehow detached from the Conservative Party. He straddled politics. He was above it. It was felt possible to vote against the Conservative Party without... People thought that it was okay to be anti-Tory and yet to support Churchill. So the Labour slogan was cheer for Churchill, vote for Labour.
That's pretty good.
That's a good one.
That's really good.
And they did. Right. And so they kicked him out. But again, look at that. He gets this incredible poke in the eye. He's 70. What does he do? He keeps going. He never gave in. And he gets back into government.
This is what The Economist says. You know The Economist magazine. The semi-articulated and perhaps semi-conscious musing on contemporary politics that seeped from Mr. Johnson's analysis, in which deep similarities emerge.
Well,
this is The Economist, your own homegrown economist.
Very great paper.
You're just saying that you're drawing this comparison because you want people to think of you as a Churchill in the making.
No, it's as I explain the origins of the book, which is entirely dinkum. They picked me out. They wanted.
You had nothing to do with it. The mayor of London write about Winston Churchill. I had
written an essay about Churchill, which they liked and which they thought captured something that they wanted to get over, and it was a chance to expand that message and to try to bring him to a new. But I got more in common with a three-toed sloth or a whatever, one-eyed pterodactyl with Churchill.
But you also, he had. They said this about Lincoln too. Ambition. You know how many times Lincoln lost an election before he was elected president? Like 10 times.
Amazing.
He'd been elected to Congress, defeated. Ran for the Senate, defeated. But he kept, because ambition burned in him, and so did
thank goodness it did.
So it did. So what? Ambition's not a bad thing.
Not a bad thing. Not a bad thing. And not a bad thing.
So fess up.
No, I see. Yeah. No, but I got 18 months to go as mayor, and I've got to finish that off and do my best, and then we'll see what happens. But.
So we'll see what happens. We're thinking about it, but we'll see what happens.
No, I know what will happen in London, London will continue to make progress, and I hope very much, and will continue to do all the things we.
The great urban experiment in London is alive and well.
It is, and it's always wonderful to be here in New York. We've got a lot to learn from each other as great cities, but London is going gangbusters at the moment. There's no question. We're fortunate. The objective now is going to be for our, and this is common ground. We've got to see the London effect spilling out across the rest of the country. That's what we want.
Thinking about Churchill and seeing America becoming, there are those who look at America and they look at China and they say, "This China's coming." They're going to make this, their 21st century will be China's
Well, I think that's interesting. And I think there's one of the reasons why I hope people will think about Churchill and study what he had to say, because what he thought was that Britain and America, with America now firmly in the lead, represented values, ideas of freedom and democracy, free speech, independent judiciary, habeas corpus, whatever, that were incredibly important and that were actually peculiar to those English-speaking cultures. He thought this was his. And actually, there's a lot of truth in that. And those ideas are not banal, they're not trite, and they're not uncontested. There are many parts of the world, including China or Russia or wherever, that don't subscribe to that approach. And Churchill wanted to push it forward, and he saw the English-speaking peoples as a way of ensuring that was guaranteed, and he saw America as the guarantor of that. And I think that the people of this earth are going to want America to play that role for certainly as long as I'm around. And I think that will mean that the idea of America losing a position of moral leadership in the world is very remote. I want America, and I think the world should want America to retain that position.
The book is called The Churchill Factor, How One Man Made History. The Mayor of London, Boris Johnson. Back in a moment. Stay with us.